And welcome back, everybody. May 23rd, 2023, Victory Communism Day, a new world vacation day, because the communist, Comintern, Soviet Union, and CCP have won the Operation Dark Horizon YouTube war. And yours truly, the Sky Marshal, was commander of those forces. And I say that very humbly at this point because it was just an expedition game. It was my first version 4 game and for a few others as well. But we had a lot of fun. We really enjoyed the thing. It did take 7 months, but we enjoyed it. We did enjoy the whole exploit, but of course, I think I can echo everybody's sentiments there that when Hambone rolled a 3 to end the war, I think we were all a little happy. However, I would have actually liked to see it go one more turn or a second turn or however many more there were, because things were just getting exciting for, well, look at the Battle of Nanking and the Americans. And the Americans here in Midway and a possible seizure of Tokyo with the great American and the great Japanese Kido Butai fleets to attack and combine and cause destruction in the Pacific to see who would be the masters there, as well as D-Day just happened last turn, and American and British forces all piled up on the coast of Normandy there. Even the Canadians joined in. There's a Canadian infantry division scattered out of southern England, as well as also South Africans, even though their capital is taken over. The free South African states are fighting with the British and French in southwestern France. And who knows, would Paris then have fallen? Would Rome have fallen eventually? You never really know what's going to happen. With the Second Battle of Slovakia there, the Russians did defeat another army group and I think destroyed 23 infantry divisions this turn, really causing a big hamper. But of course, the Italians still pushed north into Slovakia. Would have been interesting to see what would have happened had they gone into Romania, or if the Germans had another oomph to push in there and hopefully take Romania. We did bump up our Air Force sizably at the end of the game there, Romania, to defend it because it is fairly weak. But it is worth 2 victory points along with Warsaw. So, you know, I mean, that would have been interesting to see too. Would we then have had a race to Berlin? Would Paris have fallen? And keep in mind, if we look at the victory points, guys, and we'll tour on over here, we have a total of 8 victory points. We have the Pacific Expansion Point, the Winter War Point, Propaganda, access to the Mediterranean, European Buffer Zone, those 2 points there for Warsaw and Romania. Now, there's this one that's eluded us right there. And we're only 1 step away from getting strategic rockets, so it's possible, and I stress possible, that we also may have gotten that one too, which would have given us a total of 9 victory points with Moscow and Stalingrad. So, something to consider. Obviously, then the Allies had 6 victory points. These 2 were going to be permanently kept there, and these 2 here, these 2, actually, I think they had more than that. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, Sydney, 6, 7 with London. I could be missing one. One of these might have been taken away there. But regardless, though, they didn't have the 8. And then, of course, the Axis having 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Once again, actually, they may not even have Festung Europa even now, so I should take that off there. But basically, it's 6 or 7 victory points. I don't know if the Axis would have had a chance to go to second position if they would have been stuck in third. But the Allies very likely could have potentially taken away Tokyo, which is a possibility. Maybe, let's just say, and the Americans could have taken that. Also Paris. Paris could have been liberated. And we'll put the French Randall on that. Giving another boost of points. And technically, whatever, even if they had a good battle in the Pacific, they could have had that Pacific Blue Point. And then all of a sudden, they might have won, right? You know, if the game had gone on, and I almost predict that. But that's the cool thing about the variable ending. You don't know, so you have to play every every turn very calculated. Do you want to calculate that the game could end and maybe go for that big, burst at the end? Or are you going to try to hold on to whatever you can and hopefully make your victory stance now, and hopefully you don't lose anything, right? So, but definitely interesting to see. So as it stands right now, I believe, give or take, 8 victory points for the Soviets, and then we have, sorry, we got that there, moved the wrong one. 6 or 7 each for the Allies and the Axis. But really, it was anybody's game, I honestly believe it. At some point here, the Allies were really suffering through a good bulk of the game, but time was on their side, especially when the Russians came in to liberate Eastern Europe. And we literally got to a Cold War status with that, with this situation where we couldn't really move much or subtract much. My whole goal was to hold on to these 2 victory points, keep them out of the hands of the Germans, and let the Allies chip away at them until I would have enough strength to move again once ahead. But of course, just didn't happen, not enough time. I was proud of the fact that we had even colonies in southern Italy, even colonies down there in Africa. We literally had colonies, I believe, in every continent except North America, which probably, if I would have struck up a deal with the Japanese, I would have done that just for fun too. But regardless, Russia has an empire. Now, its Middle Eastern did crumble just because resources were shipped to Europe against the Africa Corps and the Italians down here. And we did have our colonies down here in Saudi Arabia. But I can only assure you, now that the war is over, we will be taking back our sovereign territory. And with the incorporation of Indian provinces to our empire, we are now the largest and most populated empire of all time in the world, along with the biggest landmass. So prosperous days for the Soviet Union are ahead. And maybe the CCP if they, stay in line type of thing. So exciting facts, built some cool stuff this game. Obviously I was trying to win as anybody else, but I said, let's have some fun with this. Built a Soviet light carrier, built a Soviet battleship, which is still alive, and it served its purpose. You could argue that naval fleet that I built to help in whatever aspects I was going after did help to destroy the German fleet. And that was a vital battle, because if I had not been able to sink that, the war in Europe, in Eastern Europe, might have been very different, because they would have been able to probably recall their forces from Scotland and take them back into Europe. And for a few turns here, the Soviets, as well as the Germans, were really, really touch and go, when we were fighting for survival. And that's why it's such a bare column down here between Yugoslavia all the way up into Eastern Germany and Western Poland. So that was key to trapping those forces there, and they remained there in the Scotland pocket, if you want to call it, or the Highlands pocket for the rest of the game, and nobody really touched them, taking 1 IPP off the British. You go further over here, even we got a battle cruiser, Russian battle cruiser in the middle of the Pacific, surviving, going out for a jaunt, seeing what mayhem it could have caused in the Pacific. Wintermute, I have to give props to Wintermute. If there was one person in this game that I would award something to, that definitely would be Wintermute. He played Japan really good. He all started everything with Palau as a benching out market, and that could be called a Palau tactic, and maybe I will coin that for Wintermute as his strategy, and then hopefully in the future it might be adopted by many others, because he literally decimated Australia somewhat early mid-game, and were able to control it very resourcefully and take other territories to get the victory points he needed. But unfortunately, Japan is in such a precarious position all the time. It was just a matter of time before the Soviets came in and broke that pact. Earlier on in the game, the Soviets did have a chance to take Tokyo, but we didn't, in exchange for Kuril Islands. And basically a non-aggression pact, and eventually we broke that. Now, not an official non-aggression pact, but nonetheless we broke it, the Soviets, to take up some territory here, because we needed it valuably in our fight against the Nazis. And right here, like I say, the Japanese fleet, look at the ships he built. He built the Shikishima, which is a heavy battleship. the A1500 class, as well as the Shinano, a heavy carrier. So like he had a sizable fleet right up to the end. So props. I'm really, really a fan on how he played, even though he lost most of his victory objectives, except Asia for the Asians at the end, and he might have lost that too, just because time, unfortunately, is against them at that point. Now, of course, I didn't update all of the map, just because the USA went up on a cleansing spree in the South Pacific here, gobbling up a lot of money islands, gobbling up a lot of money from Java, Sumatra, Borneo. Like, they really did take a good cleanse here in the Southeast Pacific, and I can only assume they would have done whatever they could to take the Asia point away from them, or possibly try to get their own victory points at that point anyways. Even the Philippines was liberated by the British. There wasn't too much the Japanese could do. And you could see the heavy strategic bombers, the B-29s, had landed in Guam there, and they are just practicing their bombing runs on Tokyo, as well as surrounded by a submarine fleet. But many of this stuff got decimated, as well as a large part of their ships around Nanking when the KMT attacked. And of course, that stack was decreased, but not much. They still held on to Nanking. In Africa, well, the French have their base of operations here in Eastern Africa, but really have not been able to do much. They were trying to push north to hopefully take back Egypt for some prestige, but the Italians still had a very good mopping up effect down here, and not much really was done or resolved after that. So realistically, the Italians did very well this game with the help of the Soviet Union. We lend-leased them medium bombers, light cruisers, and other assets towards their war effort, but also the Soviets lend-leased a lot to Abyssinia. Basically, I was funding two proxy wars. I wanted to fund them to keep them fighting and to keep them alive, and that was part of my strategy this game, because tactically brilliant, I perhaps am not as good as people like Jinx, Hambone, Silk, Wintermute. You take your pick, Mad Van Dam, to name a few, right? I think I was the weakest out of everybody, but I did come through victorious. Humbly, I say that because things, may not have been 100% accurate, but because of my diplomatic skills, if you want to call it, my decisiveness on trying to negotiate a lot of treaties, trying to say, hey, I don't do this, you don't do this, blah, 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 blah. Oh, sure, I'll fund the Abyssinia and, anti-aircraft guns. Really made Panzer J, when he was playing Italy, very difficult to take Abyssinia. That was good. I wanted a bastion there. Then I realized, well, the Allies are doing better than the Axis. Let's start funding the Axis. And then, of course, there comes a point or a tipping point. When do I stop? And I was kicking myself that, around the game, around 43, did I attack too early or too late? And I think you could argue I attacked at the right time. I was waiting for an opportunity where the East was empty, and I literally ran through and basically did my own Operation Barbarossa, but reversed this time, Operation Leningrad or something like that, or Operation Karl Marx or whatever, something pushing communism into the Western side there. And of course, we held it. I mean, we lost territories, but we pushed all the way up to Eastern Germany. And the decisive part of it, as I mentioned earlier, was taking out that German Navy up there off the coast of Scapa Flow, because then they couldn't come back and replenish and use that fleet to then open up another front in the north in Scandinavia and threaten Leningrad and Helsinki possible victory points, right? So very happy with the way I did that, but then I was kind of sad because you're on a defensive war now because you want to hold what you had, because at the same time I was able to take Istanbul, Bulgaria, and this area because this is worth a victory point, keeping Sevastopol and Istanbul as a victory point. So you kind of have such a big empire now, you're detrimental in the fact that you're basically funding defense now, because you have to worry about the Allies, you have to worry about the Japanese, and that's why I sent forces over into Manchuria, at the very least in a defensive nature. But now the Germans, which were making $40 a pop since they lost some of their territories, and the Italians that were boosted up to a good 20, even though Russia combined, they were still making more money than these two powers, but not totally if you factor in the Japanese. So they could gang up a war of attrition. But if they didn't, I still would have had long-term time on my hands, but the problem is, you know, I had to wait, and it was several turns for the Allies to not only land in Spain, take Madrid, put pressure on the Germans, and they, you know, saw the writing on the wall, so they did fall back. I was hoping that they would dig their feet in the west, allowing the Germans, or the Russians, I should say, to sweep across Europe and race to Berlin like an historical war, but honestly, I enjoy this a little bit more. And you look at now, the Allies have landed on Western shores, and they have liberated Western France, and only a matter of time, possibly before Paris falls, and the Germans have to fall back. And maybe if we would have played 6 more turns, we would have had that conventional war where, you know, it would have been a race on to Berlin. But obviously, the Germans still have 2 powerful Luftwaffes in the north and in northern Italy down here. The Italians still had some ships. They were able to take Gibraltar, but then it was, I think, taken back by the Allies. Fun facts, all in all, this has been just a great game, a roller coaster game. If you've been following it, if you've been diligently 7 months following it, you probably would agree this is probably one of the more exciting games I've ever seen, because a 3-way race to the end was what I wanted to see, and I helped manipulate that the best I could. And sure enough, we almost had that till the end. Of course, just nice to see, you know, the Italians in Cairo, you know, the Americans on the doorstep of Paris, occupying Madrid, taking that victory point away from the Italians. The Russians actually pushing the Germans back and holding key parts. And the Japanese Empire still holding strong, but starting to collapse as the KMT and the CCP survived. They were not attacked this whole game, more or less. The Japanese eventually did, but they weren't attacked this whole game because Australia, Money Islands, Borneo, Burma, Thailand, all these areas were important for the Japanese. And they went after that more so than China. Winning Mute Strategy, I think, was hoping that we would duke it out. We never really did, because the CCP never got to a point where it could challenge the KMT. And the KMT didn't really have the energy to challenge the CCP. So because of our lack of success with roles and influencing, we were hamstrung ourselves. So it was basically just a neutral stalemate in China for the longest time. Can't think I'm missing really anything else. The submarine warfare campaign, well, there's still U-boats, still raiding all over the map here. And the British had a tough go of that, but you can still see U-boats in the mid-Atlantic there, still raiding British commerce right up to the end. And that's one thing Madman Den did not have anti-submarine warfare radar for the longest time, and that really hurt him. And because of that, they were not able to fund the defense of South America, and you can see the Martians have now dominated all of South America, wiped out the entire human population there, and are now breeding like rabbits and starting to move over into Western African territories. The end of the world is nigh, but the Soviet ingenious mechanized machine has developed strategic rockets in the future, and they will be using them against the Martians, as well as new heavy class jet bombers. Oh yes, the Soviets will be victorious even against the bloody Martians. But yeah, this is a little bit of fun having down here during on the sideline sits. Nothing was happening on South America. I figured, well, in between games, let's have a little bit of fun. Strategic rockets also in North America there too, making their way over to the theater in Europe. Would nice to have seen a strategic rocket use in this game, but we never really got to that point either. And am I dismayed about certain technologies and certain things I didn't get? Or, you know, like not one heavy tank was built this game. But, you know, the next game or the game after that you play, you'll eventually probably find, you know what, yeah, I played a game where 2 nations or 3 nations built heavy tanks eventually. It was one of the first things they had developed, right? But all in all, you know, it's one of those things where it's our first version 4 game, and hopefully to have many more, but definitely not ones that run 7 months. This was a long gruel, and everybody deserves their R&R now, as well as yours truly. because as many of you know, the Sky Marshal Cup is coming up here in July, second week of July after the long weekend of Canada Day or Independence Day if you're Americans. I believe we got 2 or 3 Americans coming up for this tournament this year, as well as many Canadians returning. We got 9 so far, so we're gonna have 2 tables, Table Stuka and Table Spitfire. Yours truly will be on Table Stuka. General Hankernagel will be on Table Spitfire, but we'll get more into that with more videos down the road. So we're excited about that. If you are interested in playing that, once again, give me a shout, drop me a comment or message, as well as the Northern Lights Showcase is also happening in August. And head on over to Hilltop Pillbox channel for details over there. Check that out too. It's in a bigger area, Abbotsford/Vancouver area. So, you know, if you're interested in that, definitely a major airport in that area. So super excited for that to see and how that goes. Pleading with my wife to go, but unfortunately, I think she's gonna put the kibosh on that because she's going back to work. So I get it. Having kids is a blessing, but it ruins your schedule of efficiency. That's for sure. But anyways, guys, I'm going to get back to the parades in Moscow because Stalin is now recalling all of our forces for a few weeks vacation in Moscow and parades and celebration. The vodka will be flowing, that is for sure. But thanks again for sticking around, guys. There will be one more video to follow up with this version 4 before we close it off the books of this game, but that will be a little bit later on. But for now, thanks again to Panzer J, Jinx, who both had to fall out of this game for some reasons, and I won't get into them just because it's long, but on good terms nonetheless. But big shout out to Wintermute for sticking through, Hambone, the Americans, sticking through, Silk coming in, taking over the Germans and the Italians. Huge help with that. And of course, Madman Dan playing the British. I really enjoyed it. And thanks again, guys. And we'll see you again for the next operation in YouTube Wars, sponsored by the Sky Marshal. For now, guys, take care, stay classy, and I'll keep the videos coming, and you keep watching, and we'll all have a merry summer. Take care, guys. Cheers.